the galaxy whispered her name in fear. Princess Salith of the Vellari Empire was not like others of her kind. Her people were known for their psychic bonds, a sacred ability to connect minds, sharing thoughts, memories, even emotions as if they were one. For the Vellari, bonding was life itself. It was how lovers joined, how rulers swore loyalty, how warriors stood unbroken on the battlefield. But Salith was cursed. From the day of her birth, every attempt to bond with her ended the same way: screams, convulsions, madness. No one could hold her mind without being shattered by it. The priests said her spirit burned too brightly, like a sun that blinded anyone who drew too close. Others whispered she carried the wrath of forgotten gods. Whatever the truth, the result was the same. She was untouchable. Her chambers were vast and beautiful, carved from living crystal that shimmered with 1,000 colors. Yet to her, they were only a prison. No friends, no confidants, not even family dared to touch her hand, let alone her mind. The court avoided her, even as they bowed. Servants dropped food at her door and scurried away like shadows. When she walked through the halls, whispers followed, and eyes slid away in fear. To be feared and worshipped in the same breath, that was her life. But beneath the veil of silence, Salith was still a young woman. She longed for laughter, for a voice that did not tremble when speaking to her. She longed for the warmth of another soul pressed against hers, the bond her people described as sweeter than air itself. Yet she had only tasted solitude. On sleepless nights, she would sit by the window of her high chamber, watching the stars drift beyond the horizon. Planets burned like jewels against the velvet of space. Somewhere out there, she thought, life must be different. Somewhere, someone might not fear her. But that dream was as unreachable as the stars themselves. The Vellari Council did not see her as a dreamer, nor even as a daughter of the throne. To them, she was a problem, a dangerous symbol, a curse in royal flesh. The Empire whispered that if their princess could not bond, perhaps she could never rule. And if she could never rule, what good was she? Years passed this way. And then, everything changed. War flickered on the edge of the empire. Skirmishes with human colonies had grown bloody. The Vellari, proud and ancient, were not used to resistance. Yet humanity fought with something strange, an unpredictability, a stubborn fire that no psychic bond could measure or crush. The council needed peace, or at least a shield against chaos, so they spoke of the princess again. Not as a child to be hidden, but as a tool, a bargaining piece. If Salith could be offered in ritual bonding to a foreign champion, perhaps a fragile alliance could be born. Perhaps her curse could be turned into a weapon of diplomacy. She overheard these whispers. They thought her silent, obedient, too broken to listen. But Salith's heart thundered. To be traded like an object, it was not the first time her fate had been decided without her voice. And yet a flicker of hope stirred. If someone accepted, if someone truly tried, could they be different? Could they survive her curse? It was a dangerous thought, but Salith clung to it. For the first time in years, her chest ached not only with loneliness, but with anticipation. That night she dreamed again of the stars, but this time, one star glowed brighter than the rest. She did not know it yet, but that star had a name that would shatter her exile and change the fate of 2 worlds. His name was Elias Ward, and unlike all others, he would not fear her. The council chamber of the Valari Empire was a hall of shadows and light, tall spires of crystal rising like frozen fire. There, decisions were made that shaped galaxies, and there, for the first time in history, stood a human. Commander Elias Ward. He was no courtier, no politician polished with honeyed words. He carried the air of a soldier, shoulders squared, movements simple, gaze steady. His uniform was plain, compared to the jeweled robes around him, yet his presence drew every eye. Whispers hissed across the chamber. A human? Here? In the sacred court? The Valari, with their telepathic senses, probed the edges of his mind instinctively. But what they found was nothing. Silence. It was disorienting. Most beings left impressions, echoes, even without formal bonding. But humans were closed books, locked vaults, no entry, no signal. They were frustrating, unreadable, and to many Valari, untrustworthy for that very reason. Yet it was that very silence that had allowed humans to resist the Empire's domination. Armies that could not be broken by psychic waves fought with reckless will, surprising even seasoned Valari commanders. To the Empire, humanity was both an irritation and a puzzle. And now, here was Elias Ward, sent as an envoy from Earth itself. He did not bow deeply like the other envoys. Instead, he inclined his head respectfully, his voice steady as he spoke through the chamber's translator crystals. I come not as a conqueror, nor as a servant. I come to speak of peace. The words were simple, but something in his tone silenced even the whispers. His voice carried neither fear nor arrogance, but a strange steadiness, as though he understood the weight of this moment and accepted it fully. From her seat behind the council, Princess Salith watched. She had expected another diplomat with a painted smile, or perhaps a warrior brimming with pride. Instead, she saw a man who looked tired, weathered, not broken, but scarred, in ways that mirrored her own heart. And unlike the others, he did not flinch when his eyes met hers. Most who dared glance at her looked away in discomfort, but Elias held her gaze, steady and unshaken. To him, she was no cursed idol. She was simply someone. For a heartbeat, her chest tightened with something unfamiliar. Recognition, perhaps, or a kind of fragile hope. The council, of course, was less moved. "Human," one elder said sharply, "your kind defies us. You resist our order. Why should we hear your plea for peace?" Elias's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone measured. "Because neither of our peoples will survive endless war. We fight differently, yes, but difference is not a curse. It is a strength, if we choose to make it so." The elder sneered. "And you believe you are the one to convince us?" "I don't know what I am. But I know war, and I know that peace never begins with pride. It begins with listening." The chamber fell silent. Even Salith felt the weight of his words. She had heard endless speeches, overflowing with grandeur and promise, but none so bare. His honesty cut deeper than any polished phrase. The council shifted uneasily. A few dismissed him outright. Others exchanged wary glances. They would never admit it, but the human's presence unsettled them. His unreadable mind, his quiet conviction, it was like staring into a void that did not blink. Finally, the High Elder spoke. "Peace requires more than words. It requires proof. You know our customs. You know what is demanded.
The air thickened. Salith's breath caught in her throat. She knew what was coming. The princess must bond with a champion of another world. It is the Valari way. Only then may trust be forged. A ripple of fear coursed through the chamber. Everyone knew the truth. Bonding with Salith was a death sentence. It had been tried, and it had failed. No one dared. But then Elias spoke, his voice calm and without hesitation. "Then let it be me." The chamber erupted in gasps. Even Salith's heart jolted as if struck. She rose from her seat before she even realized it, words tumbling from her lips. "No, you do not understand what you ask. To bond with me is—" Impossible? Maybe. But peace is always born from what others call impossible. For the first time in her life, someone had volunteered, not out of duty, not out of desperation, but out of choice. And as Salith looked into the human's steady gaze, a spark flickered inside her. A spark she had thought long dead. Hope.
The Valari ceremony chamber was silent, save for the low hum of the crystals that lined its walls. Every council member, every envoy, every warrior present leaned forward in tense anticipation. It was time. Princess Salith stood at the center of the hall, cloaked in layers of shimmering fabric that concealed not only her body, but her face. The veil was more than tradition. It was protection. Not for her, but for them. For years, her unveiled presence had been considered too dangerous. Not because of her beauty, but because the moment someone looked directly upon her while attempting a bond, their minds tore apart under the pressure. It was said that her eyes reflected eternity, and eternity was unbearable to behold. Yet here she was, required by ritual law to reveal herself to the chosen. And the chosen was the human, Elias Ward. He stood opposite her, hands at his sides, calm as stone. Most beings who had been called for this ritual trembled, their fear pouring through the air like smoke, but Elias's face betrayed nothing but steady patience. The High Elder's voice cut through the stillness. "Princess Salith, reveal yourself and begin the test." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the veil. For a heartbeat she hesitated. To her, this was no mere unveiling. This was exposure, vulnerability, the stripping away of the only shield she had ever been given. Behind the veil was the truth of her existence, loneliness, rejection, and the curse she could not escape. Would this human look at her and recoil, as all the others had? Her chest tightened, but she lifted the fabric. The veil slipped away, falling like liquid silver to the ground. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Her face was radiant, yes, delicate features, skin that shimmered faintly like moonlit crystal, eyes the deep violet of twilight skies. She was beauty, but not the fragile kind sung of in songs. Hers was beauty that carried weight, tragedy, and a haunting sorrow that silenced all who saw her. The Valari bowed their heads instinctively, awed and afraid. Some could not bear to look at her for long. Others whispered, their voices quivering, "The cursed one, the cursed princess." But Elias did not look away. His gaze met hers, unflinching, unashamed. Not in worship, not in fear. Simply as if he saw her. Salith felt her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her like this. No one had ever dared. For a fleeting second, she wanted to believe she was not cursed, that maybe, just maybe, she could be seen as whole. The elder gestured, "Begin the bond." Her stomach nodded. She wanted to stop it, to spare this human the agony that would follow, but the ritual demanded it, and the council watched with hungry eyes. Salith lifted her hand, fingers trembling. Slowly, she reached for Elias. Normally, by this point, her partner would already be recoiling, their minds screaming under her presence. But Elias remained still. Her hand touched his temple. The world held its breath. She opened herself, just a fraction, and reached into the human's mind.
She braced for the usual storm, the scream, the convulsion, the collapse. But what she found was nothing. No flood, no rupture, no pain. Just silence. Her breath caught as she pushed deeper. Still silence. Not emptiness, but a strange steady quiet, like the calm of a forest at night, deep and untouchable. And then something unexpected. She felt herself. Her own thoughts, her own emotions reflected back at her, clear as water. It was impossible. No bound had ever been like this. It was not a collision, not a tearing apart. It was a mirror. Her eyes widened as she stumbled back slightly, hand falling from his face. The chamber buzzed with tension, though none could see what truly had passed between them. Elias's voice was calm. Well, did it work? Saleth stared at him, unable to form words. For the first time in her life, the impossible had not broken. The council erupted in debate. Some shouted that it was a trick. Others whispered that the curse had finally met its match. The elders demanded tests, proof, more rituals. But Saleth heard none of it. She heard only the pounding of her own heart. For years, she had been nothing but danger, despair, a curse wrapped in royal skin. But when she had touched this human's mind, she had not been destruction. She had simply been herself. And the human had not recoiled. He had not screamed. He had only met her gaze and asked if it had worked, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Her lips parted, a whisper barely escaping. You are not afraid. Elias gave a small shrug, the faintest of smiles at the corner of his mouth. Why would I be? You're not the curse they say you are. For a heartbeat, the chamber and its noise faded away. There was only the princess and the human, standing in the eye of a storm neither fully understood. And deep inside her, a fragile spark of something new began to glow. Not just hope this time. Something warmer.
The chamber was in chaos. Elders shouted over one another, voices rising like crashing waves. Envoys from other worlds exchanged alarmed glances. Soldiers at the edges of the hall shifted uneasily, hands near their weapons. Never in Velari history had such a thing occurred. The cursed princess had touched another mind without destroying it. And the one who had survived was a human. Syleth stood frozen in the center, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Her veil lay forgotten at her feet, her face bare for all to see. But she no longer cared about their whispers. All she could hear was the echo of what had just happened. Silence, reflection, the fragile peace of Elias's mind. For the first time in her life, she had not been a weapon. The High Elder's voice cracked through the uproar, sharp as a blade. Enough! The bond is incomplete. This proves nothing. But he survived, one counselor snapped. That alone is unprecedented. It could be a trick, another hissed. Perhaps the human shields himself with some device. Elias's voice cut through the noise, calm and steady. No trick, no device, just me. Dozens of alien eyes turned to him. He did not flinch beneath the weight of their stares. Instead, he took a single step forward, toward the elder's dais. If trust is what you seek, then let it begin here. Let me stand as her bondmate. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Syleth's breath caught. She turned sharply toward him, her eyes wide. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is not something you can just offer. If the bond deepens, if you try to carry what others have carried, you will break. You will die. Elias met her gaze without hesitation. Maybe, but if peace is to mean anything, someone has to risk it. Why not me?
The council erupted again, louder than before. Some shouted in outrage, calling it blasphemy. Others demanded he be thrown out, or worse. Yet among the clamor a few voices wavered with something different. Wonder, or perhaps desperate hope. The High Elder slammed his staff upon the ground, the crack of crystal silencing the chamber. Enough! You dare defile our most sacred ritual, human. Do you even understand what you offer? I understand enough, Elias replied. His voice was quiet, but in the hush of the chamber it carried to every ear. I understand that your people fear her, that she has been made to live alone, as if she were less than who she is. I understand that you demand she bond for peace, yet none of you have the courage to try. If no one else will step forward, then I will. Gasps echoed. The words struck like lightning. Syleth's heart twisted. Never had anyone spoken of her that way, not as a curse, not as a burden, but as a person wronged by fear. She wanted to stop him, to protect him from the fate she had seen claim so many, and yet she could not move. Part of her wanted him to succeed. Part of her wanted, just once, to be chosen. The elder's eyes narrowed. You do not understand what you risk, human. Elias gave a small, tired smile. Peace is always a risk. So is trust. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. At last the High Elder leaned back, his face carved with disdain. Very well. If the human is so eager to embrace death, let him. We shall see if his body can endure what his arrogance invites. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some faces showed hunger for spectacle, others pity, and a few, just a few, glimmers of reluctant admiration. Syleth's hands clenched at her sides. Her voice rose, sharper than she intended. This is madness! You cannot use him like this just to satisfy your doubts. But the elder dismissed her words with a flick of his hand. The choice is his, and it is made. All eyes turned to Elias. Syleth's heart pounded, her throat tightening as she whispered, almost pleading, Why? Why would you do this for me? Elias looked at her, not the council, not the crowd, but her, and for the first time a gentleness softened his features. Because someone has to see you, not the curse, not the throne, you. She caught her breath as the chamber blurred around her. For one fragile moment, she forgot the council, the war, even the curse. All she saw was the human standing before her, steady and unafraid. And deep inside, something she had buried for years stirred to life. Not just hope, not just warmth, but a dangerous, fragile longing.
The ritual chamber was unlike any other place in the Empire. It was a cavern of living crystal, its walls pulsing with faint blue light, as though the chamber itself was alive and watching. At its center stood a raised platform carved in a perfect circle, etched with lines of ancient symbols. For millennia, Vilhari princes and princesses had bonded here with chosen mates, their minds entwining in eternal unity. But tonight, all eyes watched to see if the chamber would become a tomb. Princess Salith stood at one end of the circle, her breath shallow. Across from her, Elias Ward stepped forward with steady strides, unflinching under the weight of hundreds of watching eyes. Vilhari elders, envoys, soldiers, even priests crowded the balconies above, their whispers rustling like dry leaves. Salith's hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to speak, to warn him one last time, but her throat was tight, and the ritual had begun. The High Elder raised his staff, his voice echoing across the crystal walls. "By the law of our ancestors, the princess of the Velhari shall extend her spirit to the Chosen One. If he survives, the bond is sealed. If he falls, his fate is his own." Elias nodded once, calm as though he were stepping into a sparring ring rather than the maw of death. The elder's staff struck the ground. The chamber hummed. "Begin." Salith closed her eyes, drawing a trembling breath. She lifted her hand, reaching outward. Energy flowed from her skin in a faint violet shimmer, reaching across the circle like smoke. She brushed against the edges of Elias's mind and braced for the inevitable. Screams, collapse, madness, death. It did not come. Instead, there was only silence. Her eyes snapped open. Elias stood steady, his gaze calm, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. She pressed harder, deeper, her mind straining against his. She knew what should happen. Velhari minds were fragile compared to hers. Even the strongest warriors had shattered like glass under her touch. But Elias did not shatter. She reached further, desperate now, pouring more of herself into the link. Memories flickered, her childhood loneliness, the crushing silence of her chambers, the endless whispers of fear around her name. For a heartbeat, she panicked. She had given too much. He would collapse. But no. Instead of breaking, Elias absorbed it all with that same impossible quiet. His mind was not like others. It was not open terrain, not a delicate web of threads to be torn apart. It was a wall, smooth, unyielding, yet strangely reflective. Every thought she poured into him returned to her, softened, clearer. It was like shouting into a canyon and hearing her own voice echo back, not distorted, but steadied. Salith's breath caught. She had never felt this before. She wasn't crushing him. She wasn't destroying him. She was being seen. Her hand dropped, trembling. This cannot be," she whispered. Elders leaned forward, some in shock, others in fury. "What is happening?" they demanded. Elias looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "You're shaking." The simple words pierced her. She laughed, a broken, almost hysterical sound. No one had ever noticed. No one had ever asked to see it. "I'm always shaking," she whispered back. "Just no one has ever cared to see it." The bond pulsed between them, fragile but unbroken. The High Elder slammed his staff again. "The test is incomplete. Push further. Let the full bond be sealed." "No!" Salith snapped, startling even herself with the force of her voice. She turned to the elder, her eyes blazing. "You would kill him!" Elias's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Let it be enough. You wanted proof I would not die. I stand before you. Isn't that enough?" But the chamber erupted again, voices colliding. Some shouted for more tests. Others muttered of blasphemy, of trickery. And among the crowd, she saw it. Fear. Fear that the human had survived. Fear of what it meant. She turned back to Elias, her voice barely a whisper meant only for him. "You don't understand what you've done. They will not forgive this." Elias gave a small, tired smile. "I didn't come for their forgiveness. I came for peace." Something inside her broke then. Not in pain,
but in release. She had been a prison all her life, a cage no one dared open, and yet here was this human, standing in the wreckage of her curse, looking at her as though she were simply herself. Tears stung her eyes. For the first time, they were not born of loneliness, but of something terrifyingly close to joy. The bond, fragile and new, pulsed again between them. Not a bond of minds, not in the Velhari sense, but something different. Something hers, something his. And in the silence that followed, as the council argued and the chamber trembled with unrest, Salith knew the truth.
The days after the ritual passed like stolen moments, fragile and uncertain. Officially, the council had not declared the bond a success. They argued in endless circles, demanding more tests, refusing to name what had happened. Some whispered that the human survival was a trick. Others feared it was worse, proof that the old prophecies about the cursed princess were unraveling. But none of that mattered when Saolith and Elias were alone. In the quiet gardens of the palace, far from the council's ears, they walked among the glowing trees, whose leaves shimmered like silver fireflies. The Velhari gardens were designed for bonded pairs, their psychics feeding on the ambient energy of living things. For Saolith, these gardens had always been a reminder of what she lacked. But now, walking beside Elias, the silence felt different. "You still think I'm cursed," she said one evening, her voice low, her eyes fixed on the pools of light beneath the trees. Elias shook his head. "No, I think your people are too afraid of what they don't understand." She gave a bitter laugh. "Easy for you to say. You don't feel what I am. You don't see how they look at me." "I see it," Elias said simply, "but I also see you, and that's enough." Saolith stopped walking, her chest tightening. She had spent years hearing whispers about what she was: danger, curse, burden. Yet this man said so little, and his words cut deeper than any elaborate vow. "You're strange, human," she murmured almost to herself. Elias allowed a faint smile. "You're not the first to tell me that." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not the suffocating silence of exile, but something gentler, like the pause between heartbeats. Then Saolith asked the question that had haunted her since the ritual. "When I touched your mind, what did you feel?" Elias was quiet for a long time. Finally, he answered, "I felt you, alone, afraid, stronger than you believe, and wanting—" He hesitated, then finished softly, "wanting to be known." Her breath caught. No one had ever named it aloud, that ache, that hunger buried in her chest. She turned away quickly, blinking hard, as if the starlight had stung her eyes. "You risked your life. For what? For peace? For duty?" Elias's gaze did not waver. "For truth. And maybe—" he hesitated, his voice dropping, "maybe for you." Her heart stumbled in her chest. She wanted to retreat, to shield herself with the cold distance she had worn like armor for so long, but she couldn't, not with him. His words struck too deep, slipping past every defense. They stood in silence again, the air charged, until footsteps shattered the moment. A figure emerged from the shadows of the garden, General Korath, the Velhari warlord who had opposed Elias's presence from the beginning. His tall frame was rigid with disdain, his voice sharp. "You disgrace our people, princess, letting this creature walk beside you." Saolith stiffened, her fingers curling at her sides. "Leave us, general. You speak out of turn." But Korath sneered. "No, I speak truth. This human has bewitched you."
He survived your touch not by strength, but by deception. And when the council sees through his lies, both of you will pay." Elias stepped forward, his tone steady. "If you believe that, then prove it. Face me openly, but stop hiding in whispers and threats." Korah's eyes flashed with rage, but he did not strike, not here, not under the sacred trees. He spat a curse in his tongue and stalked away, his cloak trailing like a shadow. When he was gone, Siolith let out a trembling breath. "He will not stop. You've made yourself his enemy." Elias shrugged lightly, though his eyes were sharp. "I've had worse enemies." But Siola shook her head, her voice almost breaking. "You don't understand, Elias. Velari wars are not fought with weapons alone. They will attack where it hurts most, your heart, your spirit, your soul. And now, you've tied yours to mine." Elias reached out, not to touch her, not daring to break her space, but to let his hand hover near hers, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to honor her fear. "Then we face it together." Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she felt the pulse of that strange new bond between them, gentle, steady, alive. Not the crushing weight she had always known, but a fragile thread woven from something deeper than tradition, something dangerously close to love.
Night fell heavy over the palace. The Vehlari moons hung low, casting pale silver light across the spires. From Saleth's chamber window, the stars shimmered like distant fires. She could not sleep. Her thoughts circled endlessly around Elias, the impossible bond, the council's fury, the way his eyes saw her without fear. She pressed her palm against the cool crystal wall, whispering to herself, "You are a fool to hope, a fool to dream." But deep inside, she could not silence the fragile spark that Elias had kindled. A sudden sound broke the stillness. A faint scrape, a shift of air. Her instincts sharpened. She turned, too late. Figures cloaked in shadow slipped through the chamber door, their movements swift and silent. Assassins. Vehlari, armed with psychic blades that glowed faintly in the dark. Their eyes burned with cold resolve. "By order of General Koroth, the curse ends tonight." Saleth's heart seized. She had no guards. Koroth had arranged this well. She braced herself, energy crackling at her fingertips. But before the assassins struck, the chamber door burst open. Elias. He moved without hesitation, crossing the floor like a storm. He had no psychic blade, no alien armor, only the instincts of a soldier honed in war. With a sharp command in his own tongue, he drove into the assassins, fists and steel meeting their energy strikes. Saleth cried out, reaching to shield him, but he shouted back, "Stay behind me!" The battle was chaos, light flashing against steel, shadows colliding in silence, broken by grunts and the crack of energy. Elias fought like a man who had seen death before and refused to let it take him tonight. But the assassins were many, and they pressed him hard. One broke past his guard, blade raised for the killing strike. Saleth's cry tore through the chamber. Without thinking, she reached into the fragile thread of their bond. She had never dared to push power through it, but now she did. Her energy surged into Elias, a wave of violet fire. It lanced through his veins, burning, searing, but not breaking. His body jolted, his eyes widening as new strength coursed through him. He moved faster, his strikes heavier. Where once the bond had been her curse, tonight it became his shield. But it came at a price. Saleth felt her own strength bleeding out with every surge, her mind strained, her vision blurred. The fire that had always destroyed others now devoured her. Still, she poured it into him, refusing to stop. Until suddenly, silence. The last assassin collapsed, his blade clattering against the crystal floor. Elias staggered, panting, then turned to Salith, his eyes widened in horror. She was on her knees, trembling, her hands pressed against the ground as if the weight of the stars had fallen on her shoulders. Her skin shimmered faintly with cracks of violet light. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, her voice thin. Elias dropped to her side, catching her before she fell. His hands were warm, steady, anchoring her to life. "You saved me," he said fiercely, "but you could have burned yourself out." Tears welled in his eyes, unbidden. "It doesn't matter. I couldn't lose you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and unguarded. Elias froze, his breath catching. Slowly, he lifted her chin so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. His eyes, so human, so impossibly gentle, searched hers. "I told you we'd face this together," he whispered. "Don't carry it all alone. Not anymore." Something inside her broke, not with pain but with release. For years she had been a prison, a curse no one dared touch, and now here was this human holding her as if she were not danger but treasure. Her lips trembled. "Elias, why do you care so much?" He hesitated only a heartbeat before answering, his voice low. "Because you were never the curse. You were always the one worth saving." The words struck deeper than any blade. Salith pressed her forehead against his, too weak to hold back the tears. Outside the chamber, alarms blared. Guards rushed through the halls, too late to stop what had already unfolded. The council would rage, Korath would plot again, and the Empire would not forgive what happened tonight. But for one fragile moment, in the quiet between heartbeats, Salith and Elias clung to each other, not as envoy and princess, not as curse and sacrifice, but as two souls who had survived together. And deep within their bond, fragile but unbroken, something undeniable bloomed. Love.
The palace shook with unrest. The assassination attempt could not be hidden. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crystal halls, of traitors, of the cursed princess striking back, of the human who would not break. The council convened in fury, demanding punishment, demanding order. And yet, beneath their rage, Sathlith saw something else in their eyes. Fear. She stood at the council's center, Elias at her side, both of them weary but unbowed. Her veil was gone now. She refused to hide again. If she was to be condemned, let it be with her true face unveiled. The High Elder's voice thundered through the chamber. "You have disgraced us. You have broken sacred law, bonded with an alien abomination, and unleashed forbidden power through him." Gasps and murmurs filled the chamber, but Sathelith's voice rang clear. "No, I have survived. We have survived. And for the first time in my life, I was not a curse. I was free." The words struck like a blade. Elders recoiled, envoys leaned forward, and soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. Elias stepped forward, his presence steady, his voice calm but fierce. "You call me an abomination? You call her cursed? But you know the truth. She is stronger than any of you dared admit. And she is not alone anymore. You wanted peace? Then here it is. A Velhari princess and a human, bonded not by fear, not by force, but by choice." The High Elder spat, his face twisted with rage. "Blasphemy! Your so-called bond threatens the Empire itself. You will be exiled, both of you, stripped of title, stripped of honor." The chamber erupted. Some cheered the elder's words, eager to cast them out. Others hesitated, whispers rising.
What if exile was not punishment, but the beginning of something new? Sathelith lifted her chin, her voice unwavering. Then exile us. We do not fear it, for I have lived in exile my whole life, alone in a crowded palace, abandoned in the name of fear. But with him, she turned to Elias, her eyes softening, with him, I am no longer alone. For a heartbeat, silence fell. Even the crystal walls seemed to hold their breath. The sentence was passed. Exile. They left the palace under heavy guard, stripped of royal robes, stripped of weapons. But as they stepped into the waiting starship, Sathelith felt lighter than she had in years. For once, her chains were not invisible. They had been broken. The ship carried them away from the Velhari homeworld, out into the vast ocean of stars. Sathelith sat by the viewport, watching her world shrink into a distant light. A piece of her heart ached, but she did not cry. Elias sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She turned to him. For the first time, she let herself smile. Not the fragile mask she had worn for years, but a smile born of truth. "I think," she said softly, "I'm more than okay." He reached for her hand then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers intertwined, warm and steady. Silence stretched between them, but this silence was not exile, not curse. It was promise. As the stars stretched into light, Elias spoke again, his voice steady. "Wherever this takes us, we face it together." Sathelith's heart swelled, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe. Not in the empire, not in tradition, but in him, in them. And beyond the viewport, the stars beckoned, each one a world, each one a choice. Other exiles, wanderers, and rebels would soon gather to their side, drawn by the impossible bond of a princess once cursed and a human who dared to see her face. Together, they would build something new, not an empire of fear, but a haven of hope. The cursed princess had become a symbol. The human had become her anchor. And their story was only beginning. For though no one had dared bond with the alien princess, in the end it did not matter, because the human had never cared about curses. He had only cared about her.